I'm going to pick up where we left off last time. We made some good progress. We talked about labels and what kind of things you can do to them, picture boxes, what kind of things you can do to them. We talked about aligning things. We talked about vertical spacing. We talked about all kinds of stuff. And if you've missed or forgotten some of that, there's a nice fresh recording out there that you can go back to. It was just a couple of days ago. We should have ended, tell me if I'm wrong, on buttons. So it's just another object. But buttons are used by users to interact with the program, to tell the program that I'm ready for something. Okay. And so what I would like you to do is go to your toolbox, make sure you're in design view. If your form didn't come up in design view, double click it over here. It'll be in design view. And then double click the button just to add it to the form. And I don't know if you noticed, but my button turned light green for a minute, and then it turned gray. I think Visual Studio is lying to me. That's really a green button. When it turns green, I don't know. But this seems to happen all the time, and it's not just Visual Studio 2013. It's been going on forever. Bill's ignoring me again. Later, you'll run this, or you'll take it to a different computer, and all of a sudden that button's bright green, and it adopts the background color. So my advice to you when you create a button, after you name it, which we're going to do first, is to change its color. Even though it looks like it's the right color, change it to the right color so that it sticks. I usually leave my buttons gray. If you wish, you can change them to any color. You want a light green button, you can change it. But first, let's change its name. When you add objects to the form that you're going to manipulate in code, you are going to respond to this button in code, I guarantee it. Otherwise, why are you putting this button on the form in the first place? Scroll up to its name property. Remember, the name property is always at the top. I use a BTN prefix for my buttons. You may use BUT. I've seen BTT. It's up to you. I use BTN. If you're really old, you might use CMD because once upon a time they were called command buttons, but that's long gone. So if you see me do it accidentally, it's a flashback. BTN, and we're going to make this our exit button, so then you give it a name that describes what this button does. That was on your ticket for today. What should you name your buttons that describe what they do? And you should also change the text. So let's go do that real quick. Change the text of the button to describe what it does so the user can figure it out. So I'm just going to put the word exit on there. If you prefer close or get out or whatever, that's fine. I do not require you to create programs that are as boring as the Microsoft programs can be. Those are very professional. But if you want to spruce yours up and call it something else, give it a different caption. They don't have to match in this case. The name should be appropriate. But if it doesn't match the text, I can live with that. Now scroll up to the background property of that button. Here's the back color. Notice it's light green, even though it's not displaying that color on the form. It really is light green. At some point, after saving this, after running, I haven't figured out what causes it. At some point, that button turns green. And it shows you what it really is. But I don't like green buttons. And that's what I get for changing the background color of my form in the first place. I drop that down. I like to go to the system colors for the buttons because there's a color that says button face. That is a Windows color. If your Windows system at home has dark red buttons everywhere, if you choose button face, that'll probably be dark red, and your button for your programs will match the rest of your Windows. So I'm going to use button face, and notice it really doesn't change much. I think it's a little lighter shade of gray than it was a minute ago, but now that will stick. So that's my advice. When you create buttons, first name them, change the text. And here's a bunch of properties, and I thought I changed, oh, I didn't get a chance to post them on my website. I've changed left and top. Did we talk about that last time? That those don't exist anymore? Yeah. Good, some of you are nodding. They're now called X and Y. There is still a height and width. This is part of the location. This is part of the size. Okay, height and width do exist, but they're part of size. So I have actually changed my notes. I just can't post them from here, so I had to wait till I get back to my office and post them. The button has a font. You can change the font of just this one button. You can change the text color of just this one button. We just changed the background color. We can apply an image and an image alignment and text align. Most of the time you like your text centered in the button. If you'd rather have it aligned differently, you can. Let's add an image to this button. Make sure your button is selected. Choose image and click the dots. And we're still going to use a local resource. When you're using images on buttons, they're generally small, 16 by 16, 32 by 32 pixels. So when you're searching for those in Google Images, you can actually designate that I only want 32 by 32 inch pictures, and it'll find the right size for you. 32 by 32 is a little big for a button, 16 by 16, 24 by 24, those seem to work well. If you use 32 by 32, it'll either crop it or you'll have to make your button bigger to make it fit. Import a local resource, and I'm going to use this little exit icon here. That's not an icon, that's a PNG. If I choose all files down here, there's a couple more. There's icons. Notice they're all pretty much the same size. Right, this is the old school 16 by 16 icons that I chose not to share with you because they look kind of lame compared to some of the new ones. But you can use whichever one of those suits you. There's the exit button as well. I'm going to use this one. Click on open and OK. And there it is, and it's centered. It looks like it's getting cropped off, so it's probably a little too big, but I'm just going to make my button bigger because I like that. We can change the image alignment. We saw that with the label when we added the mid-state logo. We can go left, but now my text is not quite right. The buttons, I'm going to put it back in the middle. The buttons have a special property, and I've already forgotten what it is. Back to my notes, called text-image relation. At least they used to. There it is. Text-image relation, right now it's overlay. So the image overlay, or the text overlays my image. We put images on buttons so often they have these special properties. We can do the image above the text. It'll move the image up and I'm going to have to make the button even bigger. Text above the image. Image to the left, image to the right. Let's try before. Notice it also shifts the text, so they won't overlap anymore because we turned off the overlay. This only happens with buttons. And do you like the image first or you like the image after? I don't care. I would be consistent. Whichever one suits you. I think most of my users like to look at pictures first and then read if they really have to, so I put the picture first. These objects are going to start getting redundant. They have text, they have color, they have background colors, they have sizes. We can resize buttons. There's no auto size for buttons. They're visible. Buttons can be enabled. We talked about enabled last time, right? Where we can show it. Watch what happens if I set this to false and then run. The text of the button should automatically turn gray. And so did the image. Cool. Forgot about that. Just because I disabled it, now I can't click on that button. Normally you don't do this at design time, you do it in code. You're going to learn how to do that today. Trevor?
I did put auto size on the button.
There's an auto size? Oh. There we go.
It just starts out as false.
Grow and shrink, grow only. So I can't make it, that's interesting. It false? Oh, I'm sorry, wrong one. Auto size mode, there's false. Okay. So I can say auto size it. In that case, didn't do much, did it? I didn't know it was there. Good, thank you. Normally I make buttons the size I want. But I think auto size here might not deal with the image very well. Experiment, see what happens. Definitely give buttons a name. We haven't named too much else. We named the coffee cup, right? Yep, pick coffee cup. So I expect to play with that in code. We might have named your label for your name. Yep, there'll be a name. But these don't have labels or don't have name changes because I don't expect to change them in code. If you don't expect to change it in code, you don't have to give it a name. If you're not sure, don't give it a name. As soon as you try to write code for it, go, whoops, that's not a good name. Volker's not going to like that. Go give it a name first, then write code for it. What else? Top left, font, forecolor, back color, image align, text align. So all that stuff we've already seen in labels and other places. So buttons should be pretty familiar to you, but we do have this new text image relation button that lets you manipulate those very, very well. Okay, here we go. Time to start writing code. This program is nice, looks good, but when we run it, it just sits there except for the flag which waves, and it just sits there. It does come with a close button, so I don't really even need an exit button, and in the future I will remove the requirement for you to have an exit button to remember to turn it back on again. This moves, but nothing else happens. I can minimize, maximize, that's built into the form. Anything else you want a form to do, you've got to have write code to make it do it. So we're going to start writing code. I'm going to enable my button before I forget. Everything you do in C# actually generates code. And I can prove, don't follow, I can prove that to you by going to the designer window. And you might remember we looked at this the first day and it had a few things on it. But now look, it's got a picture box, it's got a label, it's got another label named label 1, or label name. It's got another picture box labeled or named pick coffee cup. It's got a button, and hiding in here is even more code that describes the picture box, describes the buttons, describes the font on my label, and on and on. Look at all that code. You did that. You take it home, show your friends. Just don't let them ask questions. Like, what does that do? Just by dragging stuff onto the form, resizing. Every time you resize something and let go, Visual Studio modifies this code. And that's how it remembers it. It doesn't take a snapshot of what's on the screen. It loads this and said, oh, he had a label called label 2. Its back color was transparent. It had impact font of 17 or 15 and 75 size, and so on and so on and so on. It looks at all this stuff and recreates it for you. The code is what's controlling the design view when you load. If you mess with the design view, then it might mess with the code a little bit. They're very they're very close together. We're going to be messing with code for a while, so I'm going to get rid of my toolbox. I'm going to not close it, but push the push pin so it gets out of the way. That's optional. Also going to make the font a little bigger so it's a little easier to see. RJ, how's that size, okay? You're kind of far away. See it all right?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. I control scroll that if you want to make yours bigger, but you don't have to. I'm just doing it so they can see the cheap seats. I don't want the designer code, so I'm going to close that. Now I'm back to here. Some code is generated automatically. Other code you're going to write. And that's what we're going to spend the majority of the time in this class fighting with, is code. Laying out the form, that's relatively simple. Okay. But the code that makes it function behind the scenes that you have to write, that's what this class is all about. To view the code, you can point to the code form and double click it. That's risky, don't do it. Go ahead. Double click somewhere on the form, but I missed. I hit a label instead. And notice what happens when you double click an object. Two things. First of all, it brings you to code view. And we're now looking at code, but what it also did is created an event handler, is what this is called label 1 click. This is the code that's going to execute when the user clicks on that label. Huh? I don't expect the user to click on that label. So I don't really want this. So let's delete it. What I like to do is point to, notice that whenever code gets created in C#, this is a C# thing, blocks of code are surrounded with curly brackets. So here's the namespace. Here's the beginning curly bracket of the namespace, and here's the end curly bracket of the namespace. Every block of code has curly brackets around it. That's why these are called curly bracket languages. There's going to be curly brackets everywhere in your code. You're going to learn where to put them. The indentation is important. Here's the beginning and the end of the namespace. If I click here, it shows me its twin for this class statement, partial class statement. If I click here, there's form sample initialize component. There's its end curly bracket, and here's this one. Notice that some of them are tucked underneath, and when I create them, I like them at the end. That way this curly bracket doesn't take up a line all by itself. How you line up curly brackets is an ongoing argument with programmers. Some do it my way, some do it this way. Try to be consistent. So this is the end of the event handler. Here's its title, basically. Here's its beginning. Here's its end. To delete it, I always go to the left, or to the right, excuse me, of the end curly bracket and drag up. That way I make sure I get everything. And delete. That wasn't hard. Don't follow. I'm going to run this. Uh-oh. In case you don't know, that's an error. Visual Studio is going, I can't run this. There's an error. Somewhere in your code, there's a, what code? I didn't have to erase the code. Well, when you create code, go ahead and run yours. When we double-clicked and created that event handler, it not only created the event handler, but it also created something out in that designer code automatically. When I deleted the code from here, the designer code is still there. And now the designer code's going, go find that piece of code, and it's not there, and that's the error we're getting. Nathan?
I've seen that before. I had a problem with that a lot of times when I did that, so I would just erase, or I would start over the application or something like that.
Yeah, that's painful, right? If you were 3 hours into it?
Yeah, but I finally found the way. I had to go into this, the designer thing, find the code in there and delete that.
That's exactly what we're going to do. You're going to wish you had my notes 2 years ago. All right? That's what we have to do. We have to go into that, ooh, this is dangerous now, designer code, and find the line that's causing this error. The good news is there's an easy way. There's one other way to fix this problem. You can press Control, don't do it, Control Z. What's that? Undo. That method that I just created, the event handler, undo it. I did that yesterday in my 4 o'clock class. And not only did it take that piece of code out, but it removed all the labels off my form. It removed everything since the last time I did a save. Even if I ran, it saved it. The undo said you didn't save this. It took out half my form. So undo works. It would work really well here because we haven't done anything else, right? Oh, yes, we did. We added a button. If I undo here, it'll take that code out, the extra code, and it'll remove the button. I don't want that. So here you go. This is in my notes. Here's how you do it. Got an error message on the bottom of the screen like me? Double click it. It will take you to the designer code, line 63, where the error is. Double click. There it is. The blue squiggle, now a red squiggle, is Visual Studio's way of telling you this is an error. And down below there, you could try to read it. It says sample 2 form sample does not contain a definition for label 1 underscore click and no extension method accepting. What does all that mean? It means I can't find this. It used to be there, but you blew it away. I didn't want it. Here's another power tip. I'm going to the left of the line numbers. This is why you import my settings, because you have line numbers. To the left of the line number, you can click in that white space and it selects the entire line, press the delete key on your keyboard, now that line is gone. That's how you fix it. You simply double click the error, it takes you to the line, you see the red squiggle, you delete the entire line. Here's a power tip. Don't double click on your form unless you mean it. When you double click anything on your form, including the form, it creates one of those event handlers. If that's not what you mean to do, and you don't barely even know what it means right now, if that's not what you mean to do, don't double click. When you're done fixing the designer, close it so you don't accidentally trash something else in there. Let's go back to design view. I'm sorry, close your code view. Here's my error list. I like to unpin it so that it goes away when I don't need it. It'll come back later if I have another error. You can even close it and it'll come back. When you make errors, the error window comes up. So you can close it. I just unpin it and that way it sits down here. If I'm not supposed to double click, then how do I get to code? The safest way to get to code view without having any side effects is click on these 2 little angle brackets right next on the Solution Explorer toolbar. It says view code when you hover on it. I think you can go to view And is there a view code here? Should be. Code. It doesn't say view code. Code. I think the book tells you there's a shortcut key. I don't even know what it is. If you don't want any side effects, use the angle brackets. And that'll take you to code view. Notice it didn't create anything. I'm going to pause the recording for a second and fix my font because it keeps putting it back every time I close the window. So, no excess code. Whew, good. In my notes and in the book it says, how do you switch back and forth? Once you've got it open, you just switch by using tabs. But what if you accidentally close this one? Then you have to go to the form CS file over here, that little black and white form, double click it, and it opens up. That's the only way to bring that back. There might be something under view, but I've never looked. If you close your code window, use the angle brackets. Once they're both open, you can click back and forth. You can also switch, you can also drag them around to say, I want my design to be first. I'm just dragging the tabs, and you can reorder them so your most important one that you're working on is on the left, so it's easy to find. Optional. A lot of things you can do. Now I want to, however, let's finish reading my notes here, see if there's anything I missed. To view the code, you can double click on any object on the form. However, if you double click on an object, it creates an event handler. I hope you meant to do that. If the event handler already exists, that's convenient. Double click the button and it'll take you to code view. There's always an event handler for a button. Even if you're not ready for it now, you will be later. So buttons are safe to double click on. That's not bad. The event handler most applicable will be created for you automatically. Whoa. Let's go to the button in design view and double click it. Microsoft, the Visual Studio team, has decided that when you create code for a button, you probably want it to respond to the click event. How many different events are there? Ooh, sit tight right where you are. Let me just show you. I'm going to the button. I have it selected. This little lightning bolt shows you, it's right here in the properties, shows you the events that are available. A button can respond to any one of these events. Sizing, somebody changed the background image, and it responds to that. Bizarre. I don't even know what half of these mean. The cursor changed shapes. They dragged my button somewhere. The font changed. The key was up. The mouse clicked. The mouse hovered. All of these events you can write code for. Each one of them can respond differently. I do very little except the click event because that's what users do to buttons, right? They click on them. But any of those others you can write code for. If you've followed me, and I ask you not to, but that's okay. If you followed me, you want to go back to properties by clicking this button to go back to properties. We're rarely going to be using that events list. I just want to show you that there are lots and lots of events. Now I want to go back to code view. I could click this, I could click that, or now I know there's an event handler for the button, so it's safe to double click it and it takes me right in there. And it doesn't create another one. Note, there's a private void at the beginning. Private means that only this function, or this form, excuse me, can use this event handler. That's normal. Void means that when this event is done, it doesn't send anything back in code. You don't even have to remember this stuff. Here's what you remember. Don't mess with that. What's this stuff? Much later in this class. Don't mess with it. Just leave it. It's and you can't delete it. It's necessary. One thing to recognize, though, is that Visual Studio has automatically assigned a name, that's a name, to this event handler called button_click. And it's created corresponding code over in the designer window that's also called button_click. So you can't change the name of that without making a mess. If you haven't named your button, it's called button1. This will be called button1_click. If it's still there when I get it, it's a half a point. That's a bad name. I can't tell who it belongs to because you probably went back and changed the name of the button after the fact. It won't change this. So how do you fix it? Two ways. You can delete it, but what happens when I delete it? Now I got to go in the designer and delete it there. Yes. Or you change its name here and you run your program, you get an error. So I've never heard of it. Go to the designer, change the name there. So My advice, when you make buttons, name them right away. That way, as soon as you double click them, the click event will have the right name and you won't have to figure out how to rename it. If it happens to you and you can't remember how to rename it, first of all, it's in this recording, but it's one of 6 in this unit already. And it's at 25 minutes and 10 seconds. So write that down. No, just ask me. You will ask me questions and I will say it's in the notes, page 27. I do want you to go look for some of this stuff in the notes. Or I will say, if I know, that it's in recording 3 for unit 2. I'd like you to dig some of this up on your own. But if it's something you don't do very often, like Volker, you said if I didn't name that right, you'd help me fix it. Okay, now come help you fix it. What kind of stuff can we do in here? Let's find out. Curly brackets, we already talked about them. Code features. Microsoft Visual Studio's code editor. Remember, this is an IDE, an integrated development environment. We can create forms by dragging them onto a designer. We can run the program, which compiles it, by the way. And we can write code. It's a lot like a word processor. You can cut, copy, and paste using your shortcut keys. I think I taught you those, right? Control X, Control C, Control V. You can drag code around. Remember, on a Mac, if you're dragging, it's Control Option. You can drag just like Microsoft Word. It also uses color coding. Notice that some of the words are blue, some are teal, some are black. Those aren't words, they're keywords or they're names. Once something has been assigned a name, it turns teal. These are keywords. They are part of the Visual Studio C# language. You'll get used to them being blue. If they don't turn blue or they don't turn teal, your brain goes, wait, something's wrong. There are more colors. There'll be comments later on that'll be in green. All kinds of stuff that we can do here. They automatically indent to show ownership. All of these things belong to the namespace. In the next ticket, the author asks you, what's a namespace for? It's required. That's not the right answer. Dig it out of the book once. It contains a bunch of classes. What does that mean? What's a class? It's a stupid definition if I don't know what the definition means. What's a class? Well, it describes my form. Some of the stuff he asks you for, it's easier for me just to have you dig it out, answer it, than say, don't do this one. What a namespace is for at this level of your programming career is not terribly important. It's required. Notice it has the same name as my project. It's required. It's basically a project. What about this thing? If Visual Studio created it, leave it alone. This initializes your form. This one I created. Visual Studio did the typing for me, but I created it by double-clicking on the form. Automatically indent stuff, shows ownership. We'll learn what that means and how to do your own. The curly brackets are automatically indented, but notice they're a little different. The initial ones are separated on separate lines, and this new one, this is the Volker, this is my Volker favorite way of doing curly brackets. I start a line, and my line ends with the beginning curly bracket, and then the end curly bracket lines up with it. So I can see where this event handler begins and ends. There's some options for how to control where the curly brackets appear. IntelliSense. Let's see what that looks like. Let's go back to the form in Design View. And this time, make sure you're in the middle of nowhere. No labels, hidden stuff. Double-click the form. It creates another event handler called form load. This event, form load, happens automatically as your form is loading into memory. Before it even displays on the screen, when you hit run, how long does it take? A couple seconds and poof, it's there. Most of that's just Visual Studio compiling your program. If you double click on an executable, it pops up immediately, but it looks immediate to us, but there's billions of seconds, there's thousands of things that are happening in the meantime. They just happen very, very quickly. Form load is code that we can write to say, before you show this form to the user, do this. Do what? I I have an example, but it's not very good. It says do this dot back color. That's not very good. Let's go get rid of the clouds so we can see this. Go to the design, form background image, select the form, and then go to background image and reset it. Yeah. Is that lovely green? Now I want to go back to my code. I know there's a form load event handler, so I'm going to double click it, the form, and it'll take me back to the event handler. There we go. In my notes, it shows you the command to change the background color of the form using code. You start with the keyword this. Notice as I type, IntelliSense kicks in even before I finish typing. Okay. Escape. TH, there's IntelliSense. You want this? Is that what you want? You don't have to type the rest of it. Press tab, press enter, whatever, and it fills the rest in for you. You're all going to become 75 word per minute typers here pretty soon. When you learn to use IntelliSense, type a couple letters, yes, that's what I want, press tab, press enter, maybe a dot or a comma, just something so that Visual Studio knows, yes, that's what I want. And it just keeps right on and going. Now I'm getting an error. Well, we're not done yet. Visual Studio is fast. It's like Microsoft Word. Ever notice it notices you spell words as soon as you press a space, it goes wrong? Same thing here. I finished typing this and it goes wrong. Well, I'm not done yet. Chill. Right? When you get done with a line, if it still says it's wrong, okay, now you got to go take a look. According to my notes, we have to say this. This, by the way, is the name of the form. This form. That's what this is for. Whenever you want to refer to the form itself. I want to change, look at all this stuff. If you look at most of those, they have little wrenches on them. Those are properties. All the properties that used to be over here are now available and more when you're writing code. There are some properties that you cannot access unless you're doing code. I want to change the background BAC color. Oh, there it is, back color. How do I know that's the right one? You're trained by me. I taught you it was back color. Tab, so I don't have to type it. And now I want to change it. Equals. Visual Studio has built in it a list of colors that it recognizes. But some of those are pretty weird names. So you first have to say, give me the list of colors. And notice how much I have to type before I get that one right. Sometimes it's 2, 3, 4. And you don't have to wait. You can grab your mouse, but I hate letting go of the mouse. Or letting go of the keyboard. I hate letting go of that if I don't have to. But you can let go of the mouse and come over here and click on one of these. Don't do it. And it'll put it in there for you. Backspace. Color. And now don't even press tab. Just press a dot. And here's a whole list of colors that you can choose from, like blanched almond. Ooh, my favorite color. I don't even know what half of those are. Pick one. Double click it. It puts it in. I'm still getting an error. What's that error for? If you hover, it'll tell you, I need a semicolon. You almost want to go, well, if you need one, why don't you just put it in there, Visual Studio, since you're so smart. Ruby on Rails is the only language that'll do that. You press enter here and go, oops, you forgot semicolon. I'm not even going to tell you. I'm going to put it there. And if you don't want it, you're the dummy. Go fix it. Here, you have to type your own semicolon. A command in Visual Studio always ends with a semicolon. What about this one? That's not a command. It's an event handler. There's some. Okay. Not every line, every command, and you'll learn to distinguish these very soon. And if you forget, Visual Studio puts a little red squiggle there, psst, psst, semicolon, put a semicolon here. So that should change the background color of my form. No. In design mode, the form is still green. It's not until you run that that form load event occurs. Go ahead and run. And now I get my burly brown, I guess. You can change that to any one of those colors. If you don't like the color you chose, somebody's blind over there. If you don't like the color you chose, you can change it. You don't like the colors on the list, you can use any one of 2 billion colors. Now this didn't make the recording, so I'm going to launch paint.net to put it into a recording. My exit button, not working. We didn't write any code for it. It's just a button. It sits there. Notice it does kind of blink at me, right? Built in, that's the behavior of a button in Windows 8. Close this. There are 2 billion colors that Visual Studio and Windows and Apple, for that matter, can recognize. 2 billion different shades of colors. How do you know? This is paint.net. Remember, it's a free download. It's the one I recommend for changing images. And you can get, from this color wheel, kind of grab one and say, that looks pretty good. And it will tell you the hexadecimal color code for that. Every color in this wheel, there's 2 billion. Every color in that wheel has up to 255 parts red, green, and blue. You multiply 255 times 255 times 255, you get in the 2 billion range or something like that. It's close enough. It's a huge number. Okay. And you can get to any one of those if you know the color codes, but who knows color codes? This is my exact shade of yellow that I want. Use Visual or use paint.net to give you the color code, and then later on I will show you how to use that color code. For right now, just pick from the list. Blue, light blue, burly wood, whatever. Pick one from the list. In the future, I'll show you how to access any one of 2 billion colors by using those codes. Notice this color, 255, 255. I'm going back to Visual Studio. Just sit tight. And let's say I want to change the background color here. Notice the numbers? Oh, look there. The light green, it actually parks the numbers next to it. I can expand this. No, I can't, but I can type. Anybody remember the numbers? 255, 251. I don't remember. Go back. 255, 251, 160. If I actually type those numbers, I know it's not done yet. Go away. Oh, 255. Gotta better remember 251, comma 160. Same color. 255 times 255 times 255 different colors. And you can get very, very precise. You can also use paint.net to find out what color something is. So if I brought a picture in here, I could use this little paintbrush or the eyedropper and say, what color is that? All right, oh, it's off the screen, so it won't let me do it. What color is that? White. But you can bring in a picture and suck up a color. So if you want to match the mid-state red exactly, or match the UWSP purple exactly, get an image, use the eyedropper, grab the purple, and note the color combination over here in advanced. That's a little off topic, but let's get back on topic. And I definitely don't like that burnt wood, so I'm going back to my code, and now you just change it. What I did discover, let me see what happens, see if they fixed it in 2013. Notice I took that out. Where's my list? If you take out the dot and put it back, it'll give you the list back. If I remember right, Cadet's blue is kind of a gray blue thing, and that might be better. Let's test it. And okay, I can tolerate that. Kind of dark, but it's okay. That's an example of a Visual Studio command. A C#, excuse me, not Visual Studio. This is C#. It's a specific programming language. That's a C# command. If you enter that command into JavaScript, it probably won't work because JavaScript doesn't recognize this. It's a C# specific thing. But JavaScript requires semicolons. JavaScript requires curly brackets. It likes the equal sign. It has a color list. A lot of this stuff you learn at once. You try it in a new language. Does it work here? Yep, cool. On I go. Nope. Google it. How do I do it in this language? So a lot of what you're learning in this class will apply to many of the others. Another concept I want to mention here, and I'm going to mention it again later. In all programming languages, equations like this are read right to left. Take what's on the right-hand side of the equal sign and assign it to the background color of this form. So you'll often see equations A equals B plus C. Add B to C, take the answer, put it in A, whatever that means. Everything works. The equal sign, we analyze what's on the right, push it into what's on the left. Always, all languages. Since the dawn of time of languages, it's been that way. Programming languages. I would like my button to work. Anything in my notes here? curly brackets, IntelliSense, we saw that. Very handy. Makes you a much faster typer. If the list doesn't appear, remember I hit the color and the dot and it didn't come up, you can, this is often hard for me to remember, press Control Space and it'll make the list come up. So if I decide that Cadet Blue is too dark, Control Space brings up the list again. Oops, I forgot to double click. Now I got an error. Where? Can't see it. There. Control Space, Cornflower Boo, double click. There we go. How's that look? Works. So Control Space, that's in my notes. If you can't remember it, I will probably remember it now for a while. We saw the auto list. If you make errors, you get the red wavy line. We saw that. And this one, if you see green wavy lines, it's Unit 4, probably. Here's the command. How do you know these things? You paid big money for this, for me to teach you these things. Many of these commands are in your book. It's not something you just intuit. After a while, once you've learned one language, you might say, well, let's try this in this new language, see if it works. That's what we're doing in my iOS programming class. Brand new language called Swift. I've never seen it before. It's so new. In JavaScript, you do this. Nope, doesn't work here. C#, you do this. That doesn't work either. Google it. Oh, you don't need the parentheses anymore. Take them out. The language concepts are very similar. According to this, the command to close my form is this, that's the form, dot close, but note the parentheses. The parentheses means this is a built-in command that the form knows how to do. It's a command, not a property. Properties are colors and sizes and those kinds of things. Commands are do something like close this, release its memory, give it back to Windows, do all its stuff. So let's go in here. If you're not indented, make sure you're indented, and I should have the tabs. Can't do this while I'm running, Volker. Okay. Should have the tabs set every 4 spaces. I used to think, still do, that 4 is too many. But one of my fellow instructors once gave a presentation, and I was watching it. He said, do your fellow programmers a favor, and don't change tab size. Because if you change it to your favorite and then somebody else edit it, in their computer, when you go home, it's tab size 4, here it's tab size 3, Isaac likes 2. Every time we move it to a different place, it indents new lines differently. It's a pain. So I learned my lesson. The default tab size in Visual Studio is 4. I don't change it. If you wish, you can, but be ready for consequences. Type the command, this dot close. Visual Studio does not tell you you need parentheses here. You need to know that. How do you know it? It's in my notes. It's in the book. And after you've written a couple of programs, I did this in my states program. How did I do it? You go open up I do that all the time. I think about what do I need to do? I did that in this program. And I go find it. Sometimes it's easier to Google it. That's fine. That's not cheating. That's fine. Nathan can lean over to Matt and say, how did I do that close thing? What have I got wrong here? Is this semicolon? What's wrong with that? And Visual Studio will not let you run right now. It'll tell you have an error, and the error list shows back up again. I changed that. Now, initially, out of the box, Visual Studio says, you want me to run? It asks you, got an error. You want me to run anyways? You'd think what idiot would say yes? Lots of them. Because they want to run, they want to see. Visual Studio actually runs. It runs the most recently working copy of your program, which might have been a half hour ago. Who knows? So that was absolutely useless. I turned that feature off. You have errors in your program, Visual Studio will not run your program. If you don't remember what's wrong with this, you look in my notes, you look online. Maybe you can touch this and it'll, oh, look, there's an example. Form.close parentheses. Oh, darn, I forgot the parentheses. I love the example. It doesn't have a semicolon. That's annoying. I guess because the error, those red squiggles, if you touch them, you'll get error messages, but trust me, half the time they're more cryptic and misleading than they are helpful. They might give you a suggestion, so you go, oh, I don't know, let's try it. Oh, man, you're really going to miss. So try to decipher what it means. If you can't, maybe try something else. Or try it. What's the worst going to happen? Your program does things you don't want it to do. Let's test that. Start. Form color change, that's good. Click on this button. Whoa, take that home, show it to your friends. Watch what happens when I click on this button. Closes that form. Is that awesome? Isn't that what the red box does? Why do we do both? Because it's an easy command to learn, number one. All right? And it's an easy way for you to get some stuff in there. And as we get further along, I stop putting them in. Because my users, after a while, they look at the program, the people who use the programs that I write, look at that and go, why is there an exit button? Can't I just use this? Yep. Can I do Alt F4, which is the shortcut key in Windows for kill a window? Yep. Then what do I need that for? Why'd you put it there? Because it's pretty. It's got a little door on it. And I had to write code. For a while, I want you to leave it there because we're going to use it for other examples to learn how to do things. But at somewhere around Unit 5, 6, you can leave them off if you want. I'm getting tired of that teal color. How do I get rid of this? I could delete it, right? But there's a risk. A better way is to often just comment out code. Comment out means to turn it into a comment instead of real code. All programming languages have the ability for you to insert comments into your code. Those are critical because you understand what you're writing right now, but you may look at this 3 months from now and go, what the heck was I thinking? If you put comments in English that describe what you're thinking, that could maybe help you in the future. For beginning programmers like you might not remember what this does, and you might put a comment on every single line to help you remember what they do. That's fine in this class. But real programmers don't. After a while, you'll see patterns, you'll recognize, you'll have experience, and you'll get to know what code you don't need to document, comment. Because any programmer worth their salt that looks at this should be able to figure it out, though that may not be true. My philosophy is if I think I need to comment it, I comment it. If I don't, and I look at it 3 months later and I don't know what it's doing, when I figure it out, then I add the comment. Because I was wrong. Not every programmer who knows their salt can figure out what this does just by looking at it. Like me. How do you comment stuff out? Or how do you create comments? There's 2 ways. I don't want this to happen anymore. You just put 2 slashes right in front of it. Everything after 2 slashes right in a row is ignored by Visual Studio. It's called a comment. Those are regular slashes, not backslashes. So right next to the Shift key. Yes, it makes a difference. Those are comments. Visual Studio ignores that when it compiles this. It says, that's for the programmer. I don't need it. It doesn't even turn it into 1s and 0s. Just ignores it. So you can put as many comments in your program as you want. Visual Studio ignores them. They have no effect on anything. And if I run my program now, it's going to ignore that, and I'm going to get my yellow background. It's called commenting out code. It's used for all kinds of things. I use it for examples that I want to put in here, but then don't really want to stick. Take them out. But I leave them there so that you can see what I did when you copy my code or look at my code. You can see what I did. That's one reason to comment out code. Another reason to comment out code is to thoroughly document what things do. Right? It's not commenting out code, it's adding comments to your code. Let's go to the line above button exit click and click right above the little P. Your instructor is anal, so let's add a blank line there. Just press enter. And now we're going to do a second kind of comment. This is called an inline comment. Let's add, I'm sorry, before we do that, right here after the semicolon, in this dot close, a couple spaces and another slash slash. This is a pretty stupid comment, right? This closes the form. This close. My comment didn't add much to it. But I want to demonstrate to you that you can add a comment to the end of an existing line. Everything after the slash slash is ignored. This is called an inline comment because it can be added to the middle or the end of a line. It can also be a line by itself. That's fine. There's a second kind of comment. I'm now going back up here above the little p in private. Second kind of comment is called a block comment. You start it with a star and a slash and a star. Those two have to be together, no extra spaces. Everything after that, notice, turn green. That's the color code for comments. Everything is green. Oh my God. Yeah, but we're not done yet. Let's type in here. Actually, let's see if I can do this right. Next line. Oh, Visual Studio says, hey, you're in a comment. Just because it's cool, it puts a star at the beginning of this line. That star means absolutely nothing. If you want, you can take it out. This method closes the form. A lot of my students like to say, when the user clicks the exit button, well, that's kind of what this says, isn't it? And any programmer worth their salt will go, when does it close? Oh, on button exit click. I see, okay. Then the next line down gave you a new star. Hit the backspace key once. That's the delete key, the big delete key on your Mac keyboard, and add another slash. A block comment starts with a star or slash star, and it ends with a star slash. And you can make it as many lines as you want. And these extra stars, like this one here, you don't need it if you don't want it. Why did you make me put this on 3 lines? Because I can collapse it when it's on 3 lines. And get it out of the way. Here's a better technique. Leave that on the same line, but put the closing one on a different line. If you put this closing one at the end, it won't collapse. And I like to have my comments collapsed, and I can still read the first couple of sentences or first couple of words. This is the technique I'm going to ask you to use in my class to model or to document your procedures or your methods. Every one of these things that you create, I'm going to require that you describe what you think it does. 2 purposes. Tells the next programmer what it does. Second purpose, it proves to me that you know what it does. It's amazing how many of those I get that are wrong. Let's do another one. I like to space them. I'll show you why in just a second. Slash star, and then type the description. This method initializes the form. That's pretty generic. Yes, and you may use that. Because I could change the background color, I could change the font color here, I could do all kinds of stuff in here. And we generally do, this is a comment that you can copy, enter, backspace, slash. Now notice the blank line here, the blank line there. Click the collapse button on your toolbar. Isn't that lovely? Your answer is yes, sir, that's lovely. Yes, that's lovely. Because it's easy to see where the functions start, where the functions, procedures, methods, they all mean kind of the same thing. Every language uses a different term for it. In C# they're called methods. I will try my darndest to call these methods. But in iOS, in JavaScript, they're functions. In Visual Basic, they're procedures. And I'm old and my brain's got all of them in there and they all come out and they all mean the same thing. Why can't all these languages get their act together? Because they're all written by different people. It's much easier to see my methods this way. And very soon, you saw this at PSO, those of you who were there, I had dozens of procedures. When you have dozens of procedures, it's very nice when you can collapse them so you don't get thousands of lines of code boggling your mind. All I want to do is look at this one, expand it, the plus sign. That comes in very handy later. If you don't put the blank lines in between, then they're all smushed together and they're very hard to see. Technical term, smushed. I'm going to require that you have blank lines in between. Early on, I'll be forgiving. Please put blank lines for spacing between your procedures. Each procedure needs to have a description that should collapse. That way they all look the same. I want them all to be gray. If you put this up at the top, it doesn't need to collapse. It's only 1 line long. Notice I'm dragging it. Okay. Doesn't need to collapse, and so the minus goes away, but now this one's green and that one's gray, and I'm anal. I can't stand that. So I put this on the next line. And now they all collapse and they all turn gray, and I can still read them when they're collapsed. This is part of our standards. I will be doing this every single time. I don't usually break these standards. It takes time to type this stuff. I learned a long time ago that if I don't do it, you don't do it. And I want you, it's a requirement for you and your assignments to do it. Speaking of requirements, you're due for a break. Let's take one.